Arrogant tourist spits on royal guard, instant karma follows. I still remember the day like it was yesterday. It was one of those rare London afternoons when the sun shone bright, and the city felt alive in a way that made you forget about the usual gray skies. I was standing near Buckingham Palace, watching the famous royal guards, just like dozens of other tourists. The guards were a sight to see, standing as still as statues in their iconic red uniforms and tall black hats. They looked almost unreal, like something out of a painting. People around me whispered, took pictures, and admired their discipline. Everyone knew the rules. No touching, no disturbing, and definitely no disrespecting them. But that day, there was one man who didn't care about any of that. He stood out from the crowd, not because of his looks, but because of the way he carried himself. He was dressed in expensive clothes, a designer watch on his wrist, and a smugness that filled the air around him. His voice was loud, too loud, as if he wanted everyone to know he was important. He had an American accent, and from the way he spoke, you could tell he had money and wasn't afraid to show it. At first, he was just laughing, making jokes about how ridiculous the guards looked. He turned to his friend, another man just like him, and said, "Can you believe these guys? Standing here all day like robots. What a joke." He threw his hands up dramatically, shaking his head as if he couldn't comprehend why they even existed. I mean, seriously, what kind of job is this? Just standing there like statues while the whole world walks past them. I bet they don't even get to take bathroom breaks. What happens if they have to sneeze? Do they just explode? He burst into laughter, nudging his friend, who smirked but seemed less enthusiastic. "Dude, check this out," he continued, stepping closer. "I bet I can make one of them blink. Watch this." He waved his hands wildly in front of the guard's face, pulling ridiculous expressions like a clown in a desperate attempt to get a reaction. The crowd around him started to shift uncomfortably, but he was too caught up in his own amusement to notice. Still, no reaction. Then, in a moment that made my stomach turn, he did something unthinkable. He leaned in and spat directly in the guard's face. The world seemed to stop for a moment. I could hear people gasping around me, their shock mirroring my own. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands clenched into fists. The guard, however, remained still. His face, his posture, his entire being, it didn't change. The spit slowly dripped down his cheek, but he didn't move a muscle. His discipline was beyond anything I had ever seen. But then something happened. There was a low murmur in the crowd. A few people pulled out their phones, recording. A guard standing a few feet away suddenly took a step forward. His boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud, and in a firm, commanding voice, he shouted, "Step away from the guard." The arrogant tourist laughed again, but this time, it was different. His face twitched, and I could see a hint of nervousness creeping in. The guard who had spoken did not hesitate. He signaled with his hand, and within seconds, 2 palace security officers appeared, moving swiftly through the crowd. They weren't dressed in the red uniforms, but they carried an air of authority that made everyone step aside. The officers were tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded a sense of controlled power. Their dark suits were impeccably pressed, and their earpieces glinted in the afternoon sun, signaling their constant communication. The crowd instinctively parted as they approached, their purposeful strides sending a clear message. This was not a situation to be taken lightly. As they closed the distance, their eyes locked onto the tourist, assessing him with a cool, professional detachment. One of them, a man with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke first, his voice firm and unwavering. "Sir, you need to come with us immediately." "Oh, come on, it was just a joke," the tourist protested, trying to brush it off. But no one was laughing anymore. The officers didn't waste time arguing. They grabbed him by the arms, their grip strong and unyielding. That's when the panic set in. Wait, you can't do this. I have rights," he shouted, struggling against their hold. His friend, who had been laughing along with him earlier, was suddenly silent, stepping back as if he didn't want to be involved. The crowd, however, was very much involved. People started clapping, first just a few, then more and more. A woman near me shook her head and muttered, "Serves him right." As the officers led the man away, his protests grew weaker. The confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. What was left was just a man who realized too late that his actions had consequences. Once he was out of sight, I turned my gaze back to the royal guard. He still stood there, face emotionless, eyes fixed straight ahead. But in that moment, he wasn't just a soldier in a uniform. He was a symbol of discipline, honor, and incredible restraint. A small breeze passed through, and I saw it, just the tiniest movement. He blinked. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. And somehow that single blink carried more weight than any words ever could. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something important. Not just a foolish tourist getting what he deserved, but a moment that showed the strength of quiet dignity over loud arrogance. And that, I knew, was something truly unforgettable.